Thanks for tuning in to Women Who Open Doors, a podcast that amplifies the voices of incredible women business leaders who are making a difference. I'm your host, Julie Cossack-Collins, owner and coach at Not Magic. Join us as we explore what's possible when we empower one another to dream big, live boldly, and pursue our personal and professional goals. Get ready to be inspired because together we're building a community that opens doors and changes lives. Well, welcome to Women Who Open Doors. I'm super excited today because we have a flip the script type of interview today. So I would love to introduce you to our guest. Jeffery Tobias Halter is a consultant, author, gender strategist, and the president of YWomen, a strategic consulting company focused on engaging men in women's leadership advancement. YWomen focuses on driving actionable business plans and strategies to help organizations create integrated women's leadership strategies and encourage team members to participate as allies and advocates. Jeffery is the former director of diversity strategy for the Coca-Cola Company, a two-time TEDx speaker, and the author of not one, but two books, including YWomen and The Leadership Imperative to Advancing Women and Engaging Men. His clients include IBM, Amazon, Bristol-Myers Squibb, and other Fortune 500 companies. So welcome, Jeffery. So excited to have you.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks for having me on.
I love that we're flipping it a bit today, and welcome to Women Who Open Doors as our first male guest to the podcast. I've always said this is not a podcast to bash men. It's not exclusively just for women. So I really, really enjoy having the opportunity to chat with you and your work today. I know in our pre-work and some of the questions that we've talked together, you always share, you're usually the only man in the room to be first on podcasts like this. So this is not an unusual setting for you. I always say, like, sometimes I was the only woman in the leadership room. So tell us a little bit more about your inspiration and what really inspired you to do this work.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I was working at the Coca-Cola Company. I'm a sales guy. I started at Procter & Gamble, worked at Coca-Cola 20 years. And this actually has an impact on my work, and I'll circle back to that at one point. I was actually taking a staff rotation function in sales training, and the Coca-Cola Company laid off 8,000 people. And overnight, they said, you're going to go run our newly launched diversity training program. And I thought, I'm a straight white guy. What do I know about diversity? But I had two children and I really needed a job. So I was happy to not be one of the 8,000. And so we started with this really baseline training that you all your listeners have seen or heard. And it was pretty bad. But what was fascinating is as I sat as a hostage in my class, I heard stories every day from my friends, from women and people of color and my LGBTQ friends about the experiences they were having. It was significantly different than the experiences I was having. And after about 4 weeks, I had what they call a white male epiphany, where you realize what white male privilege is and the world revolves around me. My voice is always heard in a meeting. I'm usually the majority in a room. And I didn't choose to become an advocate at that point, but I chose to get curious. And I'll put this out there for your listeners. And that is, number one, there's a lot of men who want to help, but we need to be brought along. And so I started doing research because I was really, really curious. And what I found was there was all kinds of research out there around the business case, work Tom Peters was doing, an amazing white paper called A Knapsack of Privilege, things that we take for granted. And then I started going to employee resource groups just to get to know people and find out what their challenges were. And I walked into the women's resource group at the Coca-Cola Company, and the president was a very high profile woman. And as I got up to leave, she said, "Where are you going?" And I said, well, this is a membership drive and you're looking for committee people, and that's not me. And she said, no, 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 I know you get this. And I want you to chair strategic planning for the Coca-Cola Women's Forum. And I looked at her and I knew this was not a woman you should trifle with. She was clearly a rock star at the company. And so I became the first male member of the Coke Women's Forum. I would write the first 3-year strategic plan to move membership from 80 people, not just women, people, to over 1,200. And now that group is probably 6,000 globally. That was 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. And as I started doing this work, it just really dawned on me that, in any meeting, men are 80% of the audience. And in all this work that I had read about with women and gone to women's events, it was kind of women talking to each other. Mm-hmm. And the point is, if men are 80% of the audience and 80% of leadership, well, you're not going to drive long-term systemic change without us. And so you have to invite us in. And then the other thing is, there are a lot of men who want to help, and this will be hard for your listeners to hear. They don't know what to do. Yeah. They don't know what it looks like on a daily basis when I'm becoming an advocate, when I'm becoming an ally. And so almost 18 years ago, I launched my company called YWomen, which focuses really on 2 things. One is helping companies create end-to-end integrated, I would say, women's strategies. But in this day and age, I've really pivoted to talk about any underrepresented group. And then the last one is to train men as allies for showing up and actually being visible and vocal about the change that needs to take place.
When you were doing the work at the Coca-Cola company, and even as it morphed to your own business, go back to what you stated earlier a bit about, there is a large group of men. There is men, maybe not as large back then as there seems to be movement a bit more in this time. But what do you think was the barriers for them? I want to help, but I want to help, but help us kind of talk through that, the psychology of that.
Yeah. It really boils down to about 4 things that I have found. One is apathy, right? What's the big deal? Yeah. Why are we having this discussion? It's 2025. It's 2005. What's the big deal? Why are we having this conversation? The next one was a lack of empathy. Jeff, I believe men and women are maybe having a different experience, but is it really that big a thing? Mm-hmm. A third one is lack of accountability. If my boss doesn't ask about this, if it doesn't affect my paycheck, come on. The company's not really serious about this. We never talk about it in a staff meeting. Leadership never talks about it. Oh, they may show up at a meeting, but they're not serious. Mm-hmm. And then the last one is fear. And that is, I'm so afraid that I may do or say the wrong thing that I, as a white male, can have a very long, healthy career and choose to do nothing. I'll give it a wink and a nod. I'll go along with it. But, that's not going to solve it. Yeah. So I came up with solutions to each of these. The first one, from an apathy standpoint, is you have to learn. You have to engage in the data. You have to look at the war for talent. You have to look at microaggressions and breaks in the pipeline that are keeping women and other underrepresented groups from advancing. So engage in the data. A lack of empathy, you have to listen. And it's as simple as this. It's going out with a colleague, a female colleague or an underrepresented group colleague, and saying, I understand you're having a different experience than I am. Would you share something about that? And don't be surprised if Maria doesn't want to share anything, right? Maria does not want to bear everything that Hispanic women are facing today. And then ask again, and then ask a third time. And in that last 10 minutes, if you ask genuinely, You will hear stories you just cannot believe that she has experienced in her life.
Yeah, you're building trust at that point in order to
Absolutely, and
even
you're
get to that point.
you're building empathy. Well, number one, you're building trust with them, and then go do it 10 more times, because
Mhm,
empathy is a big reason of
mhm,
why men to choose to do this work. From a lack of accountability, men have to be leaders. They have to ask tough questions. You've got an interview slate. You've got an interview panel. Why aren't there any women or other underrepresented groups in this? Because we know it used to be we would have 1 in 4 underrepresented groups in a panel. We find out that the number now has to be even. It has to be 2 or more,
mm,
because one's voice is still overheard. So you have to lead. You have to ask tough questions. And listen, learn, and lead are all head things, right? They're data driven, but
mhm,
empathy. To overcome fear, you have to have the will. And in my experience, the will comes from a personal connection. Most men never realize that if I'm not doing this work, I'm betraying my spouse, my working spouse, my sister, my daughters, my aunt, maybe my working mother who helped me move ahead. And it's because men never make this personal connection.
mhm.
And when the going gets tough, when Ron down the hall is just an idiot and says something inflammatory, you have to summon your courage and go down and talk to them and say, Ron, that's not the kind of company we're looking to build here.
Mhm.
Would you want your daughter working for this company? And if they don't have a daughter, talk about a spouse. Talk about, would you talk to your mother that way? And really try and make it personal. And here's the last thing: there's a lot of knuckleheads in companies. So don't start with the knuckleheads. And
Mm,
most training focuses on the knuckleheads.
mhm.
I think there's 40% of men out there who want to help. I think there's another 40% who could be brought along if there was a good business reason, if I understood why we're doing it, if my boss asked about it. And then 20% will never get it.
Yeah,
So just ignore them.
yeah.
Create an environment where they will work themselves out.
Mhm.
So, long answer. So I apologize for dragging that on.
No?
But the thing is, there's not one barrier. There's
Yeah.
many barriers, and that's why progress has been so slow.
Yeah, I think that's the piece, right? There has been progress, but the progress is still moving at a snail's pace. I mean, the stats, as you said, you just look at the statistics on it, the
Yeah.
women on boards, the women of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. So, what currently still is that barrier? Maybe the biggest one that you see, companies, obviously we're in a very challenging time today, and we could talk about that too, but really just what do you still see as the biggest barrier? Is it that fear portion that you talk about, or
Again, I'm going to go back to there's not one.
yeah.
It's multiple, right? I
Mhm.
think where I started in this work was most companies lack a strategic vision.
Mhm.
You know, you cannot, if you ask a middle manager, well, why are we doing DEI? They can't tell you.
Yeah.
DEI has been pigeonholed in HR. And I was in HR. And with all due respect to my HR brothers and sisters, DEI needs to be owned by the business.
Mhm.
We did some
At the
amazing
strategic
work at
level. At the
Coca-Cola
strategic level, for
at
sure.
a strategic
Yeah.
level, right?
Yeah,
From
for
end to
sure.
end, from consumer all the way through supply chain to
Mhm.
communities and all the best practices that you have. It's a fascinating time in the 2010s. Companies were doing multicultural marketing. McDonald's was a leader in this. Why? Because 60% of their consumers are African American.
Mhm.
And if you look any really B2C company, 87% of women are shoppers in the B2C world. I don't have the exact numbers now, but Target is reeling. After they backtracked on their DEI initiatives, there was a 40-day boycott over Lent, and the numbers, are going to be coming out in the next week or two. I want to see what it is, but early indications are their foot traffic was down over 15%. Well, if you think about this from a DEI standpoint, the target consumer is female. It's 80% female. Their whole concept and brand is built around women. But then on the B2B side, what does your sales force look like? I did some work for a large commercial real estate company, and they had a very embarrassing call. They went to make a call on a company that needed real estate. They were putting about 800 IT people in another building. And when the company showed up, they had 4 men on their sales team. And across the desk from them was 4 women who were handling the corporate reload. And not saying it doesn't work, but boy, it certainly begs the question from the buyer standpoint, from the female standpoint, do you really understand what I'm looking for here? And so they set about a major initiative to change their sales force. And that's the first question I ask when I work with companies is not what's your representation of leaders or anything else. What does your sales force look like? And where and that's a huge start. So,
give some tips then, Jeffrey, on this. How do companies, you have a strategic approach to your work, but give some tips on how do you attach it to the strategy? You mentioned it became an initiative. So walk us through a little bit about this strategic approach to making this part of the business.
Yeah, I think it really goes back to senior leadership and what are you trying to accomplish? So many times this will start out with a chief diversity officer or a human resource officer. I can't tell you the number of times I've talked to companies who have just promoted someone internally and they really don't know what they're doing. It boils down to, I'm going to go back to this commercial real estate company. The president challenged the operating division, the sales division, to come up with a solution to exponentially increase the number of women in sales. All of a sudden, this is coming from senior leadership. It's tied to the business, and they are going to go put together a plan. There's accountability. This isn't some HR initiative. Oh, by the way, HR was linked to them, helping them every step of the way. But I ask leaders, what are the 3 things keeping you up at night? And up until a few months ago, where now they would probably mention tariffs and what's going to happen in the business. There's 3 or 4 things, right? And it's all about the business. How do I grow my top line, right? Revenue is tough. Boy, business is tough. How do I increase operating profit? Well, how do I get the right people in the right jobs? How do I get more efficiency? And that links to the third one around engagement. Companies know 80% engagement says, I'm going to get, in a 40-hour week, I'm going to get, 36 good hours of work out of an employee. And I know nobody's working 40 hours a week, but you think about that. But now you've got companies who would actively disengaged employees. Is any work getting done?
Yeah.
I think the number across America today is less than 50%, which says I'm paying you for 8 hours a day and you're giving me 4 hours of work. And so your diversity strategy needs to link to the top line, operating profit, and engagement. And you start from there. You don't start from we need more women in leadership. No, you need to do an assessment and figure out why you need that, and then put initiatives in place.
And as you described, it still has to attach to a metric, right, for the accountability piece. But sometimes the metric is just hollow. right? Like you're
Oh,
saying, it's not attached to a strategic initiative. It becomes, and then it's really not at the core of what
yeah.
the company is needing to do.
I have spent 15 years arguing with people over quotas, right? We measure everything in business, right? From scrap at the end of a bad run to spillage to safety. And yet when we say we're going to track what our workforce looks like by demographic, oh, by the way, we have women or people of color underrepresented, we're going to put a program in place. Well, that's just like fixing your spillage problem or your safety problem. We have to put programs in place. Now, what company would put a program in place and not measure it and hold people accountable? These are not quotas. These
Mm,
are business metrics set by
right.
business leaders. And oh, by the way, you tie it to compensation. And they don't get a bonus for hiring and promoting people of color. They get a deduction if they're not meeting a plan they create. So the business leader has to create that plan and they have to come up with a rationale. And then senior leader signs off on it, but they do one thing, they hold them accountable. And
Mhm.
that's, I mentioned accountability earlier. That's what's missing.
Yeah.
Nobody's holding anybody accountable.
Give me a time, maybe an example of one of those aha moments for one of your clients, maybe a senior leader, a CEO, someone in the C-suite, where they made it past. I think the biggest one, that you described is fear, where they came on the other side
Yeah.
of that, and maybe what their journey was or what they shared with you, obviously nameless, but share with us a little bit of that, personal journey.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories. I'm working with a large. This is a national liquor distributor, and this was a women's forum event. But the CEO had invited his senior leadership team there to listen. And I told my story, and I walked through, and typically at the end I talk about the personal connection, the father of a daughter, etc.
Mhm.
And afterwards, it's always funny because I have 5 or 6 women who come up and want to talk to me, and there's this guy there, and he's obviously a pretty mature gentleman. And he said, "I want to thank you." He said, "I have 5 daughters,
Mm.
and it has never occurred to me that I have to do this work." And he thanked me. He committed to going and doing this work. And that was one of my best stories. Got another story, and this is about my bias. So I was up at the Catalyst Awards, and they were giving awards out to the best companies to work, and it was between the sessions and the event that was going to be going on. And I walked into the bar, and there's a bar stool, and next to me is a guy I could only describe as a curmudgeon, right? Whatever
Okay.
your
Okay.
vision of curmudgeon
Sure.
is, you know,
Yeah.
and I'm always the guy who's going to poke the bear. And in
Mhm.
my mind, he's the guy who got dragged here to say, see, this is what you need to do. Here's what these people are doing. You need to come online. And so I kind of, in a smart alecky way said, hey, what are you doing here? And he's really humble. He says, well, I really don't want to talk about it. And I'm kind of smirking, going, yeah, of course you don't. And he said, I'm getting a really big award in a couple hours, and I have to get up and talk to everybody. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, I championed this women's initiative, and over the last 3 years, we've put 25% more women in leadership in my division, and our programs have been exported as best practices. And I just don't like to talk in front of people, and so I'm really kind of having a drink and getting up the courage. And I have to tell you, this was my moment, right? Where I said, there are so many guys who want to help. They look like everyone, because my bias was old white guys don't get this.
Yeah.
And now I can say this as an old white guy, That was my other really big moment,
Yeah.
and it came from you got to ask the question and really meet people where they are.
Hmm.
So those are two stories that kind of paint the whole landscape of this work.
Yeah. I love the theme of that. It is men that want to help, and women also have to be open to that concept of men want to help. And I think that's, this is where the bridge can happen. And we just have to, learn all of the key concepts together, not just alone. So, we're in this challenging time right now around DEI. How do you, share with people, even with the metrics, right? The work is, it's not just about the percentage changing. These are qualified women. They are here to do the job. It's not just to hit the metric.
Yeah.
How do you engage in that conversation with people and help maybe some of those arguments that are out there and have been out there for years?
Yeah.
How do you challenge that conversation?
Yeah, one of the things I go back to is, deal with the 80% who want to help and drive change.
Hmm.
And it's an interesting number because even though there are all these headlines out there about the companies canceling their programs, it says 1 in 8 is canceling their DEI programs, and they
Right.
parade out all these names. You know what it says? 7 out of 8 companies aren't canceling their program.
Hmm.
And my daughter, I'll use as an example, and I'm so proud of her. She's actually president of their company's women's forum. I don't know where that came from,
I don't know where I was going to say a
but
little tip off the old block there, Jeffrey.
she works for a 300-year-old German textbook company,
Hmm.
and she just went to a conference that was hosted by their CEO for all the heads of diversity, and said, you know what, we're not walking away, we're doubling down.
Hmm.
And we really see this as a business opportunity. You know what? We need bright and talented people, and we want to meet them where they are.
Hmm.
And so I know there are thousands of companies that are taking the same approach. And you just have to go look at the list, whether it's Working Mother Magazine. You look at the diversity best practices, whether it's Marriott or Accenture or just dozens and dozens of companies who are now doubling down,
Hmm.
and they're very smart, and it speaks to really what's going on today and why this is so important. And I've been telling this story for 20 years. Starting 20 years ago, 10,000 boomers a day reached retirement age.
Hmm.
10,000 a day, every year. That's 3.65 million for 20 years. All the boomers are gone.
Hmm.
And the reason I say this is really twofold. Number one, this is no longer an old white guy issue.
Yeah. Hmm.
Most of us are gone. This is now a Gen X and the next generation challenge to fix. Not to say we didn't build the foundation and make a lot of
Right.
mistakes, but we've got to start a new dialogue. And then the other one is, people are talking layoffs and going back to work and everything else. Unemployment in this country is still 4%,
Hmm.
which says there's a lot of jobs out there. If you go out to LinkedIn, there's 11 million jobs.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if you don't think your employees are going to vote with their feet when you say, I want you to come into work, I can speak for a handful of millennials that I know, a couple who work for the government, who said, nope, you know what? If I can't have flex time, if I can't have time with my family, I'm just going to go find another job. Well, you know what? They can find other jobs.
Right. Right. They're out
So,
there.
and
Yes.
and the beneficiary are the smart companies who are saying, "Oh, we still have flex time.
Hmm.
Oh, we still have this,"
Yeah.
and we publish our pay equity that we're an equitable employer.
Hmm.
You know what? Those are the companies that are going to win, and the
Right.
companies that don't have a strategy. When did Kmart realize it was Kmart? When did Sears realize it was Sears? There's a lot of companies that have signed up for going out of business strategies, and they just don't know it yet.
Yeah. Well, they're not attaching the the culture, the organizational culture to the strategy. A lot of these younger generations, you met Hannah on our team.
Yes,
You
absolutely.
know, absolutely a wonderful person. And really, this is about making sure there's purpose. There's purpose for this next generation too, not just the personal needs, but and this is a purpose. This is a purpose to make sure
Absolutely.
that we integrate and advocate for different populations within an organization. So, yeah, give me the advice then that you have. You walked me through the four components, but what's really the advice for men and women as they have that aha moment or they hear some of the words and the stories that you've told? What's the first bit of advice on how people make that bridge or get started in this journey?
Yeah, it's really kind of built on a stair step approach, right? And those first two, I believe, are in concert. Learn and
Mhm,
listen. And
mhm,
the reason I raise that is something as simple as reaching out and seeking to understand. Go have one conversation, go have 10 conversations. And this is always fascinating because I get a lot of men that say, isn't that intrusive? And I'm saying, don't go up to a woman you don't know and say, hey, I hear you're having a different experience, right?
right.
And I also say it's also tonal.
Mhm,
Maria, I hear you're having different experiences than I am. Can you tell me about that?
mhm,
Versus Maria, I hear
mhm,
you're having a different experience. Can you tell me about that? And so
mhm,
there's a genuineness to
mhm,
that. So that's the first one. The second one is be a mentor and a sponsor. And give me just one moment. I have to pull up this soundbite. This is from McKinsey. For all your listeners, the McKinsey Women in the Workforce study is the first thing you should grab and take back to your organizations and have a staff meeting on 2 pages of this data and do it every couple weeks for a year just to create that dialogue.
mhm,
Um, McKinsey says allyship is non-existent among 61% of men and 65% of women who say they are allies
mhm,
for people of color at work. Less than 8% of men and less than 12% of women mentor a person of color.
mhm,
I want you to think about this. These are the people who already get it
right.
and they're not stepping forward.
Yeah.
And they're not going to their colleagues to say, hey, what's going on in your world? What don't I understand? And so
Mhm,
if we can't get allies to take that step,
right,
well, then we're in real trouble. So the
right.
first two are really reach out and understand, and then mentor and sponsor.
Mhm,
And then the third one is engage in the research.
yeah.
And it all starts from there.
Love that. Love that. You mentioned, you're in the senior moments of your career, and we were talking earlier today that there's a lot of senior leaders that are considering retirement. People don't even want to call it retirement, but
Right,
really kind of
absolutely.
moving to that next phase. So, what are you seeing in the workforce? How are you working through that personally too? As you're like, what's my
Yeah.
next legacy?
It's like everything. You've got to have a plan. And I actually encourage people, regardless of their age, you got to know what you want to do. And I'll
Mhm,
share a real quick personal story. I told you I was in sales for 20 years. And I went to Covey Principal Centered Leadership when I was at Coca Cola. And they had a journal on what we loved about our lives and what we hated about our lives. I hated being a salesperson. I
mhm,
had gotten a job out of college because I was getting married and I was good at it and I made a lot of money. I didn't like being a salesperson. And so I had a list of what did I do in my daily work that I loved to do. And one of the things was when you were a director at Coca Cola, you had to teach sales training. And so I said, you know what? I really like this training and development thing. And so I went back and started in this sales training, and I went back and got a master's degree. And I didn't know where it was going to go, but I said I want to do something that really moves me. And I got to tell you, it was 2 years later that the world changed, and something I never thought would move me came into my world. But you know what? I was prepared because I had taken that first step. And now I've been at this for 25 years. And I got to rewrite that plan. And so I would encourage people, you got to dabble in a lot of things. If you think you can just check out and play pickleball every day or golf every day or volunteer every day, you need a plan. And it's not too young. You're not too young to start that plan. But I don't know that she wrote a book on it. I was at the retirement of Jeanetta Cole from Bennett College. And this Jeanetta Cole is just amazing. Go research her, watch her on YouTube. She's the daughter of a Baptist preacher. Okay. So she's one of these people that are so animated, and you sit up and you're listening on every word. And she goes, I'm contemplating Act 3. She's 75 years old and she's retiring. And everybody said, what's Act 3? She said, Act 3 is what's next. I'm going to live to 95. I'm going to live to be 100. I got to go explore what Act 3 is. And I don't know what that is. But I'm going to take the next 6 months and I'm going to go find out what Act 3 is. And by the way, it may evolve, it may change.
Sure.
But go immerse yourself in stuff you never dreamed of. And meet with people. Even if you're an introvert, you got to go meet with people. And you got to meet with people outside those people you know.
Right.
So find a way to network, join some group you would never join, and don't focus on one thing. If you think it's going to be hiking and join a hiking group, great. That's one thing. I'm going to press you for 5. And then figure out and go from there.
Jeffery, I love the concept. I really appreciate even just some of the concepts that you've brought forward, because I believe it's not just about helping women, right? If you're open and you listen and you learn with each other, I think it's a wonderful, beautiful concept just for life in general. It's
Absolutely.
not just for how do we advance women or how do we advance the next generation of men too, because I think obviously that could be another topic that we do at some point. But I really appreciate all of your lovely stories and the work that you do. And you fit just perfectly in the Women Who Open Doors meaning and purpose, because it really is just about advancing people and giving courage to those that, and it doesn't mean that I'm talking about women that need to advance, but the courage of even men leaders and such to move the needle forward. So thank you so much. Where can our listeners find you and all your great work?
Yeah, I've got a website, www.women.biz. I have hundreds of white papers, articles, podcasts. Everything is available for free. Download them and just use them in your company. And I'll close with one thing that I probably should have highlighted earlier. And that is, this is also incumbent on women to go out and invite in that guy that you think gets it. And so you can use this podcast. You have my permission to throw me under the bus, but go up to a guy you think who gets it and says, I heard this guy and he talked about how men can be a better ally. How do you think you could be a better ally? Because I know you get it. Would you step up? Would you help me? And I'm going to tell you 9 times out of 10, they're going to do it, but they need that invitation from women. It's just not something we come to. So that's putting a little bit of homework on your listeners.
I love it. We have to do the work together because we can't do it separately, and we can't sit on the sidelines and complain. Absolutely. We have to sit and be proactive ourselves as women. So thank you again. I appreciate it. I know we talked about your upcoming vacation, so enjoy the travel.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Get some more advice for myself. So thanks so much for spending time with us on Women Who Open Doors, Jeffery.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you for joining us on Women Who Open Doors. We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we have. Do you know an incredible woman business leader who's opening doors, making an impact, and lifting others up? We'd love to feature her story. Recommend a guest by emailing our producer Hannah at hchurch@not-magic.com. And please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to help us share these amazing stories. And until next time, keep dreaming big, living boldly, and opening doors for others.